As I mentioned today, the feast of the apostles, Philip and James, and other than the words that we have about Philip in our scriptures and a couple other areas, we don't know an awful lot about James. There's two Jameses as apostles. This one they sometimes call James the Lesser. Maybe not because he was smaller or less, because we don't know much about him, other than the fact that he's been named an apostle. Now that's pretty significant. Whether we know much about his life, his characteristics, his personality, we know that Jesus called him in this special role, and maybe that's enough for now, other than the fact that he still works to help us as all the saints in a way that would help us to grow to trust Jesus as he learned to do, as well as Philip. As we hear, there was a lot of questions going back and forth about what Jesus meant about certain things, and certainly about what praying and asking for anything in his name, and will he do it? Well, their lives didn't necessarily get easier. I'm not sure if they prayed for that part or not, but I guess what Jesus may have invited them to say and to pray is that they be faithful to him as he was faithful to the Father. So that's a prayer I think that we can all pray. And as we begin to know more about Jesus, we know more about God the Father. How perfect that we see working in Jesus' actions, his self-offering, the fact that he didn't do really anything for himself. He did it because the Father's will, and why did he suffer and die and rise? For us. So those are characteristics now that we could begin to ask Jesus to help implement into our own lives, as we also hear the call to be self-giving in a way that Jesus even says might be greater works, because now we can do it in him. He's going to the Father not to distance himself for us. In fact, the resurrection, he reminds us that he's with us. God with us doesn't change in a new way that ultimately both shapes our calling and sees that that's done and acted out in the church, in this ecclesial body. He asks us to trust and encounter him, both in the Word, in the Eucharist that we are celebrating, and in one another, in our actions and our choices that look an awful lot sometimes like his. When we do things like he did, washing the feet of his disciples. And maybe that's not exactly literally what we do for one another or for those around us, but I sense that that can be a model and an expression of what and how we live, following Jesus in that way, because I sense that that must be a great indication of who God the Father is and why we have the privilege then not just to pray, although that, but to do so in response. This was first a God who reached out to us, and we see the power of those first encounters, and yet now seeing how Jesus has said, even maybe more powerful than those first encounters with the risen Lord, is Jesus active now in us and through us as he nourishes us with his very life and instructs us by his word. And we can do that and become expressions of that in the flesh, you and I. So that's pretty important. That's a pretty important responsibility, and one I hope that we have committed ourselves a bit more deeply to as we've renewed our baptismal promises not too long ago at Easter, and said, I do, when we were asked those questions. So I think real important for us that we are acknowledging that now, and as we gather together, asking St. Philip and James, asking St. Anthony, all the patrons that we could acknowledge to see that that's must be why they're so motivated to help us and assist us, because of their passionate love for Jesus and recognizing what he instructed them and how they continue to live because he lives. And that's the invitation to us all. That's pretty special, and I hope you acknowledge that as the source of your own dignity as followers of Jesus Christ in a way that would help us to strive ever more and more to being that type of expression as we're nourished by Jesus' very life this day.